A Turkish cargo plane crashed in Kyrgyzstan.
A cargo plane has crashed in a residential area.
At least 37 people have died after a Turkish cargo plane crashed in a residential...
On January 15, 2017, 4 pilots from ACT Airlines, a Turkish cargo airline based in Istanbul, were getting ready for a special mission. They were assigned to operate 2 flights for Turkish cargo, starting from Hong Kong and heading to Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan, and then back to Istanbul, Turkey. The 4 pilots had prepared for this duty, with 2 of them operating the first flight while the other 2 would take over for the second phase of the journey to Istanbul. The captain, Ibrahim Dairank, and the first officer, Kazım Ondul, both 59 and ex-Air Force, had 10,800 and 5,900 hours respectively, with about 800 and 1,800 on the Boeing 747. The aircraft that they were going to fly was a 14-year-old Boeing 747 which had no recorded technical problems on it. Although the weather was generally good, a cold breeze in Bishkek had caused visibility issues. The hope was that conditions would improve by 6 o'clock. However, the weather was so severe that the original airport couldn't be used as planned. Fortunately, alternative airports in Astana and Karaganda were suitable, with only light snowfall. Despite the challenges, the flight was legally required to proceed. The pilots diligently checked notices about the flight, calculated the fuel needed for the 6-hour journey, which was around 96,640 kilos, and, when ready, taxied the aircraft for takeoff. The weather conditions forced Captain Dairank to decide that he would personally handle the flight, following ACT Airlines' manual. As they prepared for departure, a delay occurred in loading the cargo into the actual cargo hold, causing the pushback and start request to be delayed until 7:12 p.m., over 2 hours behind schedule. This meant they would be working until at least 2 o'clock. The flight departed from Hong Kong without any issues. At around 400 feet, the captain engaged the autopilot, climbing to an altitude of 34,000 feet. 2 hours before descent, he handed over the controls to the first officer to prepare for the approach briefing. During the briefing, crucial details were discussed, including weather updates, notices, and the approach procedure. However, the captain neglected some critical information, which investigators later found to be related to the approach and minimums for altitude. For a safe landing, a specific angle and altitude were required. Captain Dairank mentioned the weather during the briefing, indicating an intention to use runway 26. However, he did not explicitly discuss the approach and the need for accuracy in altitude. As the aircraft descended, the crew faced challenges due to the closeness of high mountains, restricting the descent to 22,000 feet. The controller's decision was influenced by the need to maintain a safe distance from the mountains due to the prevailing cold weather. Eventually, the crew received permission to descend to flight level 180, which means an altitude of 18,000 feet above sea level. During this time, the crew communicated with the approach controller, who provided weather updates and approved the landing. The aircraft, however, was still higher than the intended altitude. As the aircraft continued its descent, the crew faced a warning from the autopilot, but this was not acknowledged or discussed. The first officer continued to focus on the instruments, while the captain did not respond to concerns about the rate of descent and altitude. Approaching the runway, the aircraft deviated from the correct path, and the controller was not aware of this. The captain did not communicate with the controller about the high altitude and the need for a go-around, relying on the first officer to observe outside. The aircraft was too high and too fast, missing the correct signal that would guide it down. Instead, it intercepted a false signal, leading to a rapid descent. The pilots failed to cross-check their instruments and neglected critical warnings. The aircraft crashed into trees, walls, and buildings.
Kyrgyz families began to bury their loved ones who were killed when a Turkish cargo plane crashed into their homes. Families gathered on January 17th to mourn. A Boeing 747 crashed into their village adjacent to the runway of Bishkek's Manas airport a day earlier.
I was asleep in the morning and my wife woke me up. She said there was a bright light and asked what it could be. We went outside and saw flames and fire and thought that a plane had crashed. We ran and saw that our village was unrecognisable. Everything was ruined.
Resulting in a tragic loss of life and significant damage to homes near the airport. The accident was attributed to pilot errors, including poor decision-making, failure to communicate effectively with the controller, and a lack of adherence to established procedures. The investigation highlighted the need for changes to prevent similar incidents in the future. The crash of Turkish Airlines Flight 6491 caused a lot of damage and loss of life. The crash killed 39 people, including all 4 crew members and 35 residents on the ground. Among the dead were 17 children. The crash also destroyed 19 houses and damaged 7 more in a residential area near the airport. 14 people on the ground were injured, including some children.